Rebar is used to reinforce our structures, and Revit Structure is capable of placing this both two-dimensionally and three-dimensionally. For this discussion, let's look at how to place it three-dimensionally. To execute the rebar command, we first need to come up here to Structure, and then find rebar on the ribbon. It's toward the middle, it's right here, and we'll go ahead and select on rebar. Next, we can see that there's a few options associated with rebar, such as what shape do we want to use. Now these shapes correspond with the same shapes that show up over here in the rebar shape browser. If we would make a selection over here, it'll automatically update over here. In fact, you can actually see that shape that we're getting ready to place in 3 different locations because it'll show up underneath the properties as well. Now actually, before we get too far, it's going to be difficult to place rebar inside of a plan view like we're looking at right now. So we really should go to a section view and then execute the command. So we'll go ahead and hit escape, and then we'll move in here to our section, and then just double click where you see the circular shape. And it should take you to this view. If you have problems with a little double click, you can always look underneath the project browser, come down here underneath sections, and then just double click on section 1. Next, we're going to zoom down here to where we end up having our footing down here down below. And one of the things we're going to want to do is we're going to want to put some rebar that's going to go from here to here to here. So there's going to actually be 3 pieces of rebar that are going to be going across the bottom of this footing. Now this rebar is actually 3-dimensional. So when we go to place it, it's going to look 2-dimensional, but in reality it's going to stretch whatever the length of this footing currently is. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll execute the rebar command once again underneath Structure. Next, we need to decide what shape of rebar do we want to place. Now in order to be able to do that, we can look over here underneath the rebar shape browser, and in this case, let's just pick rebar shape 00. Essentially, it's just a straight bar. It hasn't been bent or anything. So once you've selected on that, we'll come over here, and our next option is what size of rebar do we want to place? For this instance, we're going to use rebar number 8. Now, if you're not very familiar with rebar, the smaller the number, the smaller in diameter the rebar happens to be. Number 8 is sort of a mid-size rebar. Now that we've picked a number 8, the next thing we want to do is move down here, and we can start to see this black line that's following around wherever our cursor is going. Now that's controlled by this work plane placement, which is located up here. Now let's go ahead and select on this perpendicular to cover and move down. Now we can see where the rebar is at. Now this green dashed line, this is the existing cover. And if we ever went to Structure and Cover, that's what we're looking at. So I'm just going to select back on Modify Place Rebar. And you can see that that rebar does not want to go outside of the cover location. So we'll just go ahead and place it right to the outside edge of this cover here. Right to the outside edge of the cover here. And then there's really not a snap tool for this, so we just kind of have to eyeball it, and we're just going to place this rebar roughly right here in the middle. Now we have 3 pieces of rebar, and they're actually 3-dimensional, and they're going back as far as what this foundation wall, or in this case, this footing, happens to be drawn. We'll take a look at that in here in just a moment, but I'd like to go ahead and add in yet another piece of rebar into the structure. Now I'm going to go ahead and zoom back out, and that extra rebar I'm going to start off by placing it up here inside of the foundation wall. And we'll go ahead and just hit escape to that. We'll once again execute the rebar command. In this case, rebar number 8 is still good. And the shape that we wanted to use in this case is going to be called 17A. And you'll notice that we can just come here to the pull down list, go to shape 17A. These are all just standard rebar shapes that you can purchase and buy. Take a look over here, and here we have 17A. So it's going to be sort of an L-shape rebar. Next, I'm just going to move over here. And then once we get inside of this wall, all I'm seeing is just one single little dot. That's not what I want to see. I kind of want to see this L shape. So let's come up here and let's try parallel to cover. How about parallel to work plane? Sometimes it gets a little bit confusing as far as which direction this is going to try to spin itself around. So I know that I've been known to just click on one and go, no, that doesn't look right, and just pick on the parallel to work plane in order to be able to get it to work, or whichever one to get it to work. So now I'm going to move my mouse over here, And we want to make this to be sort of like a J or a reverse L shape. So once you move it and you can see this outline, go ahead and click on the inside of this wall. And now it's placed this rebar inside of the wall. One other thing to know is if I select on this rebar, there's this option up here that says Layout. Now technically this was here even when we were getting ready to place it. I just didn't change the original settings on it. Right now it's just a single piece of rebar. Let's go ahead and change this so that it happens to be a maximum spacing. So we'll select on maximum spacing. The spacing between each of the rebars is going to need to be 4 inches, and that's already set. So if for some reason it's a different setting for you, just change that to be 4 inches. And what this is going to do is that we can already see this says quantity 223. So it's going to place this rebar over the length of the wall, and right now there's going to be 223 pieces of rebar stretching from one end of the wall to the other based on this section that we just placed it in. Now if we want to be able to make a modification to this so that it isn't just inside the wall, perhaps we want to bring it down so it's inside the footing, we can do that. All we have to do is select on these double arrows that show up, drag it down, and drag it down so it's just above this piece of rebar right here. And then you can even click on the little grip here and pull it out. Now let's go ahead and take a look at this in a 3D view so we have a better idea of what it is that we've placed. So we'll come up here to the little house, which is the 3D view button. Next, we'll want to spin this around, which you can either do by selecting on the Shift key and then holding down the wheel and then spinning it around. Or another option is just to click on a little corner up here of the view cube. And you can see that I'm here at the very edge of the cube. Spin it around. We can start to zoom in. Now it's partially getting hidden, and sometimes because it's so close to the surface, Revit will try to display that bar. But in order to be able to really see it, all we have to do is come down here and at the visual style, change this to be a wireframe view. Now we can see how it spaced it from here all the way down to the end of the wall. Now this can be adjusted and edited, which we'll have the opportunity to talk about in a future video. That being said, whenever we place rebar, we always need to consider what its size is, what its shape is, and the location of placement. You pretty much always need to be inside of a section view as well in order to be able to do it. But once we have the proper information set, as well as the proper cover depth so we know how far away from the outside edge of the wall it needs to be, we can easily drop the rebar into our design.